Welcome back to Rockstock Channel. It is Monday, July 22nd, and we have back on the channel Champion Electric Metals, my good friend Jonathan Buick, alongside his technical director, Patrick Highsmith. Champion Electric Metals is, I'm wearing my Canada Rocks hat, is another Quebec exploration story. Its ticker symbol is LTHM.CN on the Canadian Stock Exchange, and it's also listed on the OTC, ticker symbol CHELF. RK Equity has been an advisor to and is invested in Champion since about 2 years ago. And so as a reminder, nothing you're going to hear is financial advice. This is for information purposes only, but they did publish some drill results since our last call, and we wanted to have them talk through that. Patrick is based in Nashville, and you can speak about your background, but I've known you, I guess, when you were at Pure Energy a number of years ago in the Clayton Valley, and then you went to Fortescue, as Fortescue was sniffing around lithium for many years, and I think still is sniffing around. But you could talk a bit about your big company and small company background as well. And Rondi's going to do most of the questioning here. Just a reminder again to everybody, if you like this video, please like and subscribe to Rockstock Channel and click the notification bell so you'll be aware of all of our videos coming out. And please leave a comment. And you could follow Champion Electric Metals on LinkedIn as well as Twitter. All right, Rondi, why don't you just take it from here?
Okay, great. Good to have you back on, Jonathan. Nice to meet you, Patrick. So previously you completed a drilling campaign that started last year, and how it mentioned slightly delayed with the fires. Can you just give a refresh to listeners and an update of how that went, what the target areas were, and what information it provided, insightful information it provided for this year's program?
So we did our programs last year in the field. Obviously, the fires impacted that, where we lost a bunch of time. We gathered enough data through boots on the ground, as well as some of the airborne programs, that we came in January and did an EM program. And from that program, really got comfortable with going after an undercover pegmatite discovery. We went out and started drilling in March, and we saw in the drilling what was really exciting for us was we hit on 2 of those holes on the western side. So just as a reminder, we got 580 square kilometers along the Trans-Taga Road, right above Patriot Battery Metals and the Corvette discovery, and then on the western flank is Winsome. So in that maiden drill program, the whole goal of that program was, are the tools that we've been using, because we're not blessed with a lot of outcrop pegmatite, a lot of what we have is undercover from glacial tills. Could we make an undercover discovery and show them and prove that we have lithium on the ground? And so we feel it was a very good success. We did hit, and even more promising was it was at a near surface pegmatite discovery. It hit the first 2 intervals at roughly 5 meters below surface. And subsequent to that drill program, in our current field program right now, because of how shallow that is, we've been able to take good use of an excavator, go in and clear the overburden, and really expose what is now an outcrop pegmatite, because we've been able to peel back the overburden and show a really nice structure, which will be getting drilled here in the coming weeks. But maybe if you want to speak a little bit more on the success and why we feel a success with that program, Patrick.
Yeah, I think the key point, Rodney, we're drilling in an area, as Jonathan said, a huge property position that is at roughly 70% covered with glacial sediments up there. So sometimes these pegmatites crop out, like the James Bay pegmatite that my team at Lithium One discovered back in 2009, I guess it was. Big old cliff of spodumene pegmatite sticking out of the swamp in northern Quebec. But other times the rocks have been covered, and that was the case here. And prior to the drilling, we had conducted sampling for tills across a portion of the property, and we'd also conducted some geophysics. And so we knew we had some glacially transported fragments, boulders, and small grains of not only pegmatite, but spodumene-bearing pegmatite. So we knew there were rocks there with lithium in them. And then we applied the geophysics, as Jonathan said, because you find a boulder here, but if all the outcrop is covered, where did that come from? So with the beautiful databases in Quebec, we had a pretty good idea of the direction that the ice had been moving. And so we looked at a sort of up ice from there. We had some geophysical indicators, perhaps of big structures, maybe major lithologic boundaries in the greenstone belt. And of course, these are areas where pegmatites might exploit that structure in the rocks. So we started with kind of a geophysical target. And then right at the tail end of the drill program, as the ice was beginning to melt, as a matter of fact, the last couple of holes tagged into, relatively narrow intercepts of pegmatite, but with spodumene in it and very near surface. So the idea there is these things have complex shapes. They're quite old, these deposits. They've been folded, and stresses of the rocks have often made them into these sort of teardrop shapes and lensoidal shapes in the rock. So we had to figure out the geometry from there. So, as we press released, those were decent sort of initial intercepts of the pegmatite, but literally have the tiger by the tail there, meaning we had the tail of these pegmatites, and which way do they go from here thing, Rodney? So we've been spending the summer actually doing more prospecting across that trail of glacially transported boulders, finding more boulders, which we've reported on, finding more spodumene, more lithium in those boulders, some of them quite high grade at a hand sample scale, and working our way across that trend from the drill holes, which got to the tail end of something good. And we're looking both along the strike of where the ice might have ground up the rock and moved it, but also thinking about where they may be in the third dimension, because we know they come to the surface. Which way do they go? And that's where, of course, you get into the more recent press release where we mentioned that we've now got an excavator in place, and we've cleared back some of that overburden in the areas where it's shallower, and we've now found some of the outcropping pegmatite, which definitely contains the mineral spodumene again, and now systematic sampling begins, and drilling will now be a little bit more clear-cut, shall we say, because we're going to follow up now on having laid our actual eyes on the outcrop of lithium-bearing pegmatite. We're still sampling and awaiting those results, but that'll give us surface cuts and the geometry. Which way do those things dip? How thick are they? And that sort of stuff. It's really a kind of a geometry problem. Once you find a bit of lithium, how big is that volume of rock, and which direction does it trend?
So the latest drilling program is in close proximity to the original drill program?
So we have a drill showing up in 2 weeks' time. We will be looking to do an extension of that discovery on the western portion of the property. We also have 3 other high priority areas that have been worked on through the first phase of this program that we've had boots on the ground now since late May. So we do have what we're now referring to as the power line target, which is highly fractionated and giving us some interesting numbers out of the sampling, which would be about northeast of where that initial discovery was. And then we also have on the area that was originally called the Charles property over on the eastern flank. We also have 2 areas that are really highly fractionated. We've had boots on the ground in there, and we're seeing spodumene in the pegmatites. And so we'll slowly move from west to east with the drill rig, but certainly for right now, the most important part is to see if we can really understand the geometry around that discovery on the west and see what it looks like at depth. I think we need to drill deeper as well as more holes, obviously.
So for the listeners, when you talk about fractionated, what are you specifically referring to?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a good concept, and a lot of the explorers have been talking about it, Rodney. All pegmatite means really is a coarsely crystalline intrusive rock. So think of a granite, but a granite that cooled slowly, and some of the elements had more time to precipitate as larger crystals. So when these things are molten and they're coming up through the rocks, they often are a composition like granite. But as they push up through the rocks, there are volatiles and hotter things, higher fluid content versus other parts of the melt, and they will evolve off or fractionate away from what we call the parent magma. Now, this is well known in the literature, And some of those elements are really boring, and we don't want to talk about them necessarily very much, but potassium, rubidium, cesium, tantalum, other elements like that. But what's interesting is the lithium stays in that melt, in the core, the hotter part of that magma very often. And what happens, though, is these other elements show up chemically in the rocks before the lithium does. So when Jonathan refers to, and in the literature and press releases, you see this fractionation concept, it means that a pegmatite has formed, and the elements that tend to evolve off in it, we call it distal, farther away, versus proximal, closer in, that evolve off in the distal part of it, their chemistry has a footprint. And you start to look at ratios of elements like potassium and rubidium in those rocks. And what we can tell is, and what we've now proven on the ground, is that that fractionation leads a chemical vector back to where the lithium is. And the first drill holes actually confirmed that. We hit a bit of lithium just a couple of 100 meters away from an outcrop that was a pegmatite, but it had no visible spodumene in it. And so we were able to show that when you see one of those, you're in the neighborhood, shall we say. So that fractionation is a key thing, because remember, about 70% of the rock is obscured, is covered by basically glacial sediments. So that fractionation has been driving a lot of our initial prospecting. So now at the drilling site, Rodney, the first area we drilled, we have data point with lithium and a data point over here without lithium, but fractionated. And so that gives us a fairway, shall we say, that is probably highly prospective for more of the right kind of pegmatite with the spodumene in it. At the outcrop scale, I could bore you. Our team has done some great work by sampling across these outcrops, and we actually see that on the margins, the things don't even look like a pegmatite. They're very finely crystalline. We call them aplite, and yet chemically, that's the same thing that a few meters away has nice crystals of spodumene. So this is how these things zone. So when you hear the word fractionation, think of zoning. And of course, lithium being the main thing we're looking for, but these other indicators are key. And over this huge property, at least 3 different areas now are getting our attention as being fractionated or zoned pegmatites, which obviously needs more work.
How many meters is being drilled in the current campaign?
So this first phase of drilling that'll kick off in a couple of weeks will be about 2,000 meters to 2,500 meters. And then as we get the results back from the channel cuts that were done on the outcrop, as well as the boulders, and then obviously these first holes, we would look to come back in the fall. So we have the drill permits in hand across the entirety of the property in terms of key areas that we have those permits in hand. But we wanted to do it in phases just so we can really get more of the geologic understanding so that we're not wasting our funds unnecessarily.
And when would you expect to complete that and get some feedback?
So we would expect the drill program to be completed in the month of August, and then have those results in hand. They were pretty quick this winter, so I would say, if we can get it turn around again in another 6 weeks after, so we'd be looking at early October to mid-October for those results back from the drilling.
Okay, great. And Jonathan, recently I saw that you announced a $167,000 grant from the Quebec Ministry of Natural Resources. It looked like it was earmarked for metallurgical test work. When is that work likely to be done and you can draw down on that cash?
That'll be a part of the drilling. So we can, with our drill program, we can then be submitting that in as for the met work. And so that would be this August program where we'd be drawing down that money.
And where would you do the testing?
That would be done probably either with SGS or ACT Labs, who's been doing our results thus far.
And you mentioned with the package, and I recognize the greenstone belt, you're in pretty close proximity to Patriot's Corvette. What's the sort of distance between that and your drilling?
So where Corvette is to our property is like the actual deposit sits about 6.5 kilometers off our southern flank on the eastern part of our property. Where we're drilling is over on the western flank. So as the crow flies, I'd say it's probably about 80 kilometers to Corvette. And then on where we are on the western flank, we would be about 13 kilometers northeast of Kansas in the same greenstone area where they have their discovery for Winsome.
And if you can just give a sense of what the infrastructure is like around where you're drilling, is it easily accessible, that type of thing?
We've got some great drone footage, which we've put out on our socials, and where the drill discovery was sits right off of the Trans-Tega Road, which is a 12-month access road that's used by Hydro-Quebec, and it's a well-maintained road. And you can also see, as we have the drone raise elevation, you can actually see the power lines that are within a half a kilometer of where that discovery is. So in terms of infrastructure, we couldn't be more blessed in terms of access. The difference between where we are in our property and even Patriot, they just spent millions of dollars putting a road through our property to get down to Corvette, because where they are to the Trans-Tega Road is about 15 kilometers. So they just put that road in this winter, and that they're now using that to get in and out down to Corvette, as opposed to previously with helicopters. So they're even adding to our infrastructure in order for them to get greater access to Corvette.
And just as a general sort of theme and mood in the lithium market, your sense, you've got this grant, is Quebec still committed to the sort of battery supply chain, and your feelings around M&A and interest from the bigger players that have been assessing and holding back on lithium? Do you feel that there's still a commitment from both those parties?
Definitely the Quebec government is still very motivated and pursuing creating that electric corridor along the St. Lawrence to feed into the U.S. system. And that has not wavered for a minute. I think the grant that we got is the first of what will be multiple grants in the coming days. I think we'll be able to tap and access more off-balance sheet funding, such as that grant we just received. And in terms of corporate, it's, this morning I have received another inbound from a large multinational mining company that's trying to figure out who we are and where we fit. So there's definitely a lot of conversations that are already underway and interest from outside parties in terms of what Champion has and where and how we're assessing our assets, and does it make sense to have a strategic come in, and if so, at what time and at what price?
Yeah, just, you mentioned earlier, I think you said, I thought it was 535, I think you said 580 square kilometers. That's a lot of ground. So it's likely not all of it greenstone belt, but there is quite a lot around. Is that something that would make sense to Champion, to have some farm-ins or what have you on some of the other areas, because there's so much ground you got?
I think it'd be foolish not to be having those conversations. It's a challenged market. Our market cap is down 80% from last year. And we know more about the property now, and we've proven that we've got lithium on our ground. So we actually know more about the assets. And we've even offset our value proposition by we're selling one of our gold properties in Idaho to a known entity. These are guys that were the founders of Kirkland Lake Gold and Rupert Resources. Kirkland Lake from pennies to $42, and Rupert's a $1 billion company. So if we're not even going to advance the assets, if we can find a partner that's going to come in and advance those assets where we participate, we think that makes sense. So that's what we're doing with our gold assets, and certainly with the size of our land package in Quebec, if it is the right corporate big brother, we would definitely be advancing those conversations. And we think the market will remain soft for at least into probably fourth quarter this year. So there is challenges that way. Unlike a lot of our peers who are sitting dormant, not advancing the asset, we think we have a responsibility to our shareholders to continue to move the project forward. And we think the geology is warranting us coming in and spending more money here. So long answer to your question, but certainly whether it's a merger candidate or a big corporate big brother taking a cornerstone investment, we have those conversations ongoing and have had for well over a year.
Rodney, that's a key subject. If you don't mind, I might chime in. I've done that business development role for a couple of majors. I was the business development manager at Newmont back in the day in the gold business in the early 2000s, doing deals with juniors and such. And then at Fortescue Metals Group, I was group manager business development there. And, Andrew Forrest, chairman of Fortescue, didn't get where he was by not being an opportunist. And we were looking at the cycle kind of at the bottom of the lithium sector, we thought, at the bottom back in 2018, 2019, and we had a nice peak, and now we're in this trough again. And so it creates an opportunity for those corporations that are coming in and looking at being a source of capital in an otherwise difficult market, for instance. And those that strike a real partnership attitude, you'd actually be surprised. We've had some fruitful conversations where it really is a team mentality. As you say, Rodney, it's such a huge property. There may be an area where you could work together with a partner on one part of the property and keep 100% interest for our shareholders on another. So I would say that, all things are possible out there in this market, and things don't come to a stop in the business world just because, the issuers are getting a kind of a dearth of attention from the market. There's just a lot still going on. And again, Quebec, the Canadian flow through concept, those things, team up to make it possible to explore through the cycle and to get real work done. And that's what we're trying to do, advance the technical aspects to show the potential scale of this thing. And those sorts of discussions you allude to are a big part of the landscape. And there's a lot of pretenders, but there's also serious companies out there that need their pipeline filled up with lithium opportunities.
I could comment. At the Fast Markets event, I did run into someone from Fortescue, and I asked him. I thought that they had kind of given up on lithium, and he said, "No. So they've been looking for a long time, and I know they had interests in Argentina, in Portugal. So this isn't just like a kind of Western Australia play." And Rio Tinto made a recent earn-in investment, I think, with Sama, and SQM announced a deal with Tolga in Sweden. So they're, Agnico Eagle has been sniffing around. I see them at conferences all the time. I think they've done something in Canada Nickel, but they're active in Quebec. So this deal making all across the industry. I mean, copper, in big mining, there's momentum, and as you point out, Patrick, from a pipeline perspective, future deals, oil companies are entering the lithium space, from a DLE angle. So I think the broader universe of big mining, big oil recognizes that lithium needs to grow from a 1 million ton market to a 3 million ton market sometime in the next 7 or 8 or 9 years, whatever it is. It's an attractive, growing, big business, and it's cyclical like any other commodity. And the mining industry understands long cycles, and opportunistically, I would expect now should be a great time for an entrance outside of the lithium industry to enter. It may be a little bit tougher for some of the incumbents in the industry like Albemarle and Arcadium and Ganfeng, who already have projects in the pipeline, but their current cash flows are not what maybe some of the bigger boys are. So they may not be able to act as opportunistically now. So time will tell. We continue to be big believers of the hard rock story in Quebec, in particular. Winsome and Patriot recently raised capital, so there's money available in this downturn, unlike the last downturn you had mentioned, Patrick, in the 2019-2020 period. So companies just couldn't access capital, and Ken Brinsden mentioned this as well, that in one of the talks I heard him give, that there's been an education process that's taken place over the last number of years. So good quality projects, good management, not pretenders, will attract capital. And, look, we're invested in and have a number of investors, who we've helped bring into Champion. It has been, obviously, it's a risky investment when you're doing exploration and then you hit a down market, but the potential in the area that you're in the lab position, we still believe the potential for discovery is great. And, you're just going to need to keep going and keep drilling until you find. And so the current stock price, I think, is 3.5 cents. Current market cap, 8 million Canadian. So I came into a Winsome when it was 8 million Canadian at the IPO, or 8 million Australian at the IPO. It only takes one drill hole, and hopefully you guys will and your upcoming drill program. And And we'll leave it at that. All right. Thanks again for tuning in, and we'll see you soon.
Appreciate the opportunity. Look forward to it in the coming days.
All the best.